I'm going to talk about is really, I can't see that now, trying to answer the question that we were given in the call for paper, which was following up from last year when we were talking about changes over time in new religions to changes over space. And the call pointed this out and said that we should focus on space. And the title of this session is Thinking Globally and Existing Locally, question mark, I'm adding, because I ask what sort of questions should scholars of new religions ask given this title. And the questions are what, where, how, when, why, and who cares. Starting with where, there are all sorts of different desired locations that new religions can have. And the geographical spread is quite big. We shouldn't think that it's just two-dimensional. It could just be somebody along the street, networking, the kind of thing Professor Starks just talked about, which can, of course, have enormous ramifications. Another town, going out and witnessing another country, another continent, another planet. It can be to different kinds of people, and we can ask who, are they focusing, targeting? Is it everyone or only certain kinds of people? And we may also ask, are they looking for a different social place as well as the different geographical place? Are they trying to move from the social periphery to the center? Are they trying to stop being oppressed and become dominant? And is their ultimate goal to have a monopoly or pluralism or isolationism? And I think quite often you find the claim is for pluralism, but in fact it's quite often monopoly. Once we get there, we'll take over the world. I think it's important to stress that there are a lot of differences in the desired inclusiveness or exclusiveness of new religions. Some are definitely closed, and they'll try and protect their group through being very secretive or isolating themselves, either socially or geographically, or limiting the possibility of access, of membership of other people, through saying you can only do it if you've got a particular kind of DNA, or you belong to a particular locality, or they may adjust this by what the voodoo people call fictive lineage, but there has to be some sort of channel in which a person becomes the selected one, and other people are out. Then there are open. I would divide those into the passively open. They're sort of indifferent as to whether other people join or not. It's okay, you can if you want to. I think the exclusive brethren would be an example of this, although they're changing now, partly because they wanted charity status, but they are going out and missionizing. But generally speaking, they're very, very closed and don't invite people to come in. Or they can passively demonstrate what they think is the ideal, as a lot of communities do. They think this is how utopia ought to be, and perhaps everybody will follow our example. Or they can be far more active, and a lot of the new religions that we've been studying are more active in encouraging people through offering salvation, the Family International, ISKCON, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Mormons, etc. These all go out positively and say, we've got something to give you. But there are also those that threat eternal damnation. I'm always being threatened with eternal damnation by evangelical Christians, and I know I'm going to burn in hell when I die. I can do any interesting studies there, I think. And sometimes it's just that there's only one option that is available, and there's coerciveness in the spread. Either you do and believe what our religion says, or else you're going to be in trouble. There was a case in China last week where people actually killed somebody because they wouldn't give their phone number in order to be proselytized. Or the other way around, you mustn't believe or do what another religion offers. And if you do... Now, who'd want to missionize? I think there are various locations of religious identity. We can see in some of the theological ideas of new and old religions. There are those who have a kind of cosmic view of reality, and there are no boundaries between this world, the next world, anything. There's nothing to negotiate, you just have to tune in some sort of way, perhaps with the ascended masters. There's the global idea that everyone ought to belong to this religion by people who have actually very sharp boundaries drawn between them and us. And what people are meant to do is just accept and become part of us instead of being part of them. And they'll go out missionizing and bringing in everyone they can. Then you've got geographical, political boundaries, which can be taking various different forms. An obvious one would be the Russian Orthodox Church, for example. You are expected to be a member of the church. It's the same with the Armenian Apostolic Church, if you've got any blood in you that way. But they do actually missionize a bit. The Armenians not so much as the Russians. But generally speaking, nationality and religious positions go together. Then you have more local, tribal or pagan beliefs, Shinto perhaps. The kami have particular places that they exist in Japan, very much associated with Mount Fuji, but other places as well. However, there are lots of Japanese that have migrated to places like Brazil, and the kami now have new homes. And there's some interesting theology that I can't go into, connected with Shintoism and moving between the local and the global. And there are the DNA inheritance ones that I've already mentioned, touched on. The Jews, you've got to have a mother, and the Zoroastrians, a father. But if you have got that and they belong to the religion, then you are a member, whether you believe it or not. And if you don't, it's pretty hard to be able to convert and get accepted. Then you've got more ethnic, cultural inheritance. If you're born in England, you're sort of expected to be a member of the Church of England, for example. You can get married in churches, Church of England, churches, whether you go any other time or not. But that too has spread. The Anglican community is worldwide. And then there's lineage, which can go through initiation, voodoo or indigenous religions, or the leader might be part of a lineage. And you get different ways in which people are accepted as part of the lineage. Even Jesus had to go through some sort of initiation to enter the community. Then cultural, a bit like the ethnic, but not so specific, like the Methodists or Baptists perhaps. And then individuals, where it isn't seen as geographical, just individuals make choices through conversion perhaps. The conversion can be more or less forced, but it is up to them. And then you have the inner space where the individual looks for the God within. There aren't any boundaries. They're focused inside, but it is available to everybody if they seek within. And then we have the virtual religions. The location takes place on the net, and you've got a kind of creative negotiability So you get the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster with the Pastafarians and various other ones. So my next question is, how do they spread? And of course, they've been spreading new religions and old religions by trade and various means since early days. There was the Silk Road, and then the slave trade, so that you got Africans going to Brazil and sort of mixing with the Catholics, the Yoruba religion, to become Candomblé. You've got conquest, you've got the conversion of the ruler. That's St. Gregory the Illuminator, and I don't know if you can see, but there's a hole that you can go down in Armenia where he was imprisoned for ages by the king, but eventually the king was converted, and Armenia became the first Christian nation in 301 because the king said so, so everybody became a Christian. It has been a Christian ever since, they tell me. Or you can have the collapse of a ruler, as when the Berlin Wall fell down in 89, and new religions rushed through to a whole new potential number of recruits. You can have the rejection of the leadership, so people go off and find schisms. Travel, we've always had travel, but the increase in facilities for travel is enormous. Migration, the 1965 immigration bill in America, Gordon Melton's always talking about the importance of that for bringing new religions to the West. Yes, Prabhupada, for example, but there's been migration always from Europe to the USA, Africa to Europe, and Islam, and a whole lot of Islamic new religions spreading throughout Europe and elsewhere. And these multicultural encounters, they may not actually change somebody's religion, but they do relativize religion quite strongly. Missionaries, people going out, or people who've visited a place and then go home, like the British leader of Soka Gakkai, or Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism, as it was called then, came and started NSUK and Soka Gakkai in Britain, for example. But missionizing has gone on for a long time. Here you see one of the early missionary maps that I quite like. Jesuits, Jonathan Edwards, Mormon missionaries, immediately recognizable. Then the media. Now, the media have been important in a whole lot of different ways. Print, since the Gutenberg Bible, tracts, pamphlets, that's a tract of the Children of God. That's a happier picture in one of their posters. This is one of their more modern ones that they use for proselytizing. Cassettes, videos, etc. This again is the Children of God with videos. There's Uncle Jim and the treasure attic. Radio, Herbert Armstrong set up the Worldwide Church of God. Television, the televangelists. These are just examples of lots. But the internet has made an enormous difference to the religious scene as to the whole of society in a whole lot of different ways, because a new kind of communication is available. And there is now a lot of work being done on this. Social networking, Facebook and tweet. The CESNUR cult you can find on Facebook, telling us what's going on there. Virtual new religions popping up and making a difference everywhere that has access to the World Wide Web. I can become a minister and get married. If any of you want me to marry you, come and see me afterwards, because I'm a member of the Universal Life Church, as I expect some of the rest of you are. Now, you can ask, do virtual religions exemplify a change from the title of our talk, existing locally to thinking globally, to existing globally and thinking locally? It's just an idea. How demographics, another one, the birth rates. This is a polygamous Mormon father with his family, and there are much bigger ones like that. If we think of the Shakers, they could shake together, but they had no children, and you know what's happened to them, unfortunately. Intermarriage, Mooney mass weddings, lots of intermarriage there. The Druze have stayed remarkably stable and small, and you're not allowed to marry anybody who isn't a Druze, and you're in trouble if you do. But it isn't only what the new religions themselves do or don't do that matters. We have to put them in context because they are affected by a large number of other aspects of society. And there's what one might want to look at I'm calling spread prevention variables. If a country is satisfied with their own religion, they won't be nearly as open as they will be at times of change. We've seen that in lots of cases throughout history, change for various reasons. What you can try and do is kill the leader, but that doesn't always work, or kill the followers, but that doesn't always work. Or you can have an inquisition, that doesn't always work. But the Cathars were got rid of. They're meant to have existed in Montségur, which somebody in this audience made me climb up and had to carry me down because I was so frightened. He's still paying for it. Laws, lots of laws. Apostasy. This woman who was brought up a Christian because her father, whom she had no contact with, was a Muslim, is now under a death threat. We were told that the death threat was taken off, but I think that's been denied because she's seen as an apostate. Outlaw, banning new religions has happened all over the place. Forbidding proselytizing, banning extremist literature, the Jehovah's Witness literature. In Russia, Said is meant to be extremist literature. And I heard the other day that the Old Testament is considered an extremist literature in part of Central Asia. Liquidate has happened to the Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, imprisoning them. The Jehovah's Witnesses spend a lot of time in prison. And then you get just sort of the growth of negative cultural images. And you're familiar with these, which warn people against or create a great dislike of new religions. And the media and anti-cult movements have played an important role. Horrible pictures of leaders. This is something that at least the oldest of us have seen hundreds of times. Even younger people know what that stands for, which leads to reactions. This is now on the internet through Anonymous, for example. I'm going to skip through this because I think how much time have I got left? Another question I think we should ask is what's negotiable for 5 minutes? That's all right, but I won't go back. Well, the thing I skipped is that very often the mother churches will ostracize and peripheralize, if there is such a word, other religions according to how long they've been about and how nationalistic they are. And you go along a whole lot of different levels, and the new religious movements are at the extreme periphery. So the question now is, what's negotiable for change? Will people change beliefs if they are moving to a new geographical location? And how far are they prepared to do that? I heard, but I've never been able to check this out. I'd love to know if anybody can tell me if it's true. But there was a point at which the Unification Church said that Africans could have 4 wives if this was part of the culture. And I'd love to know how that fits in with the theology. I'd forgotten about it till I started writing this, and I'd love to find out. Of course, when people travel, they encounter a whole lot of different movements, and you get the growth of a large number of different syncretisms that appear. We've had a CESNUR meeting at Damanhur, for example, lots of these. But there are some new religions that are steadfast in their beliefs. And I think one extraordinary example, if you go beyond the Christians with the lions, is the Jehovah's Witnesses. During the Second World War, they were imprisoned in places like Auschwitz. If you go there, you can see the purple triangle they had to wear. And unlike the Jews or homosexuals who were there whether they wanted to or not, the Jehovah's Witnesses could sign something to say, no, we'll be good, and they could escape or be let out. And they didn't, and thousands of them died in the gas chambers. What other things? This is my one picture for Massimo. Clothing. The children of God in their comics have very attractive, scantily dressed people, but when they sell these, distribute these leaflets in other countries, they do change some of the pictures, not quite like that, but food. ISKCON probably would never give up their vegetarianism, but there are places, not just because of ISKCON, where you get McDonald's open a vegetarian-only restaurant. Recently, when I was with the Kabbalah people, we had kosher hot dogs. So there are sort of ways around. Architecture, you can get adaptations. I always think it's a bit like hotels. If you've stayed in an Ibis hotel anywhere in the world, you can immediately know you're in an Ibis, or if you're in a Courtyard or a Hilton. And yet, there's something that's local as well. There's a kind of semi-adaptation. If you travel around some of those pictures that we were seeing yesterday that Gordon was showing, I was having fun guessing the different buildings which they would belong to. And I think most of you would know immediately that that's Swami Narayan, and I think you'd all guess what that was. Anyone? Okay. Well, I'm not going to tell you because you jolly well ought to know. They're the sort of buildings that appear everywhere with Scientology, yeah. Songs, dance, music, art. You won't get the dervishes changing. You might get slight changes with the Messianic community, but I don't think so. Ritual traditions. You don't get Stonehenge all over the world, but you do get a whole lot of the pagan rituals going on as though they were. Language is an interesting subject which could have a book written about it. What happens when you move? Do you bring up the children, as often happens in new religions, talking the kind of mid-Atlantic English that they do? I remember talking to a grandmother in Hungary who was terribly upset because her grandchild didn't speak Hungarian because she'd joined one of the new religious movements. You could have an Esperanto, but I've heard of one new religion that was tried to introduce that, but it doesn't usually happen. The French stick people like the Raelians to French Canada and places. But generally speaking, English has started to take over quite a lot for the mass communication. Now, I was going to give details of an example of change due to place in China, but I'm not going to because of time. I just want to point out that new religious movements, when they started to want to globalize in the West in the 1970s, were very different from how they were and how they were received in Eastern Europe in the 1990s, for example. Those who joined were certainly not oppressed. They were middle class, well-educated. But when we had the fall of the Berlin Wall, the ones who were attracted were more oppressed in that they were seeking some sort of material advantage up to a point anyway. And in the West, there was hostility because they were new and they were questioning the status quo, whereas in Eastern Europe, the hostility was more because they were foreign and they were seen as competition to the mainstream churches. Finally, what have I got? 1 minute. Okay, finally, I'm going to skip that. It's about boundary processes. Does globalization break down boundaries, increase or decrease? And localization, protecting boundaries. Do you get more or less globalization? Again, changes. It isn't obvious what happens. So, concluding comment. New religions vary in the extent to which they're open or closed. They want to expand their location, the means by which they expand, how they're received in the new territories, how far they're prepared to adapt their beliefs and practices, and what the consequences are for them and for the rest of society. But I haven't discussed that, and that's something that I leave to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Although I did miss the